Now, welcome to Brookline Booksmith author event series. Today, we are so excited to feature author Ren Hutchings and her novel Under Fortunate Stars, and Karen Osborne as our moderator. My name is Alex Shafter, and I'm a bookseller at Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, Massachusetts. Maybe you know us well, in which case, welcome back. It's good to have you. If this is the first time you're ever hearing about our store, welcome. No matter how many times you visited us before, and no matter how you visited us, by being here, by buying books from us, for making us part of your evening, you're making us your independent bookstore, and we appreciate all of your support and your presence. Tonight, we're really lucky to have author Karen Osborne running the discussion. Karen is the author of the novels Architects of Memory and Engines of Oblivion, as well as short fiction that's been published in Clarkesworld, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Uncanny Magazine, Escape Pod, and more. She describes herself as an author and visual storyteller. And important side note, today, one of you in attendance will be winning a copy of Architects of Memory. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, Karen, thank you for moderating.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now it's my pleasure to introduce author Ren Hutchings. Ren has spent much of the past decade in game dev. She is an author mentor, has studied history and archaeology, and is a fan of pop science and perfect playlists. She also loves a good twisty sci-fi story, especially one with time travel built in and maybe a few aliens. So what do you know? That is exactly what she has written. Under Fortunate Stars is Ren's debut novel, the story of a galaxy that is generations beyond the endpoint of a great galactic war, sort of. This is where the time travel comes in, because something critical that ended the interspecies multi-generational war a century and a half earlier isn't happening right. And Uma Ozaka, who is supposed to be living her life in an era of peace, finds herself suddenly thrust into not just the past, but the middle of the history that's always fascinated her so much. The fascination gets a little more terrifying when it turns out that you have to actually make the history happen, but that's how it is sometimes. You think you're just a normal old engineer on a normal old science vessel in the spacefaring future, and then guess what? You have to save the whole dang world. I'm so excited to hear Ren and Karen talk about this lively, glad-hearted maze of a book. So everyone, please welcome Ren Hutchings.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for moderating, Karen.
Oh, thank you for having me. I am just delighted to be here. I have read the book, and it is great. It's got all these characters that are, full of humanity and full of smarts, and full of the proper response to, oh my heavens, these are my heroes. And of course, that's one of my favorite things. And one thing I loved is that we got to talk before this began, and we discovered we had a lot of favorite things in common, which is why we're having the talk today. I could go on about how much I love this book. Can you show it to everybody first before we start talking about things?
I got my author copies. This is the book here. Mm-hmm. Beautiful cover. My cover designer is Dominic Forbes. He did an incredible job. I love this. There's the back. Some little blurbs. Karen's little blurb here too.
I mean, it's good. It's good. I just love. I love the cover. It's beautiful. It's just utterly beautiful.
You should show the end papers.
Oh no way! Oh god, that's I'm
there
gonna
they
die.
are.
I'm gonna die. It's just so nice. Oh, it's got okay. I'm just so impressed by it, and I'm impressed by you, and I'm impressed by Uma and Sean and League and Kevin, and not so impressed by Darko, but that's okay. That's getting too close to spoilers. Now, I believe that it's available now in ebook and audio. Is that correct?
Yep. And it is coming in hardcover for North America by June 7th. So very soon.
And there's also something you can get right now for free, which we'll talk about later, right?
Ooh, okay.
Unless you want to say now. So we can leave that as a nice, cool little surprise.
All right.
But anyway, I love this book. I think it's fabulous. When we were talking earlier, we have a lot in common with our books and what we're interested in, like with how we think about aliens, right? Because we're both real like dyed in the wool Star Trek fans, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah. And we both wrote a first contact story, which is something that I think that we talked about quite a bit.
So let's talk about one of our favorite scenes from, well, no, let's okay, sorry, having a brain fart right up top. That's great, just great. We were talking about our favorite scene from First Contact, because we're both TNG babies, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can talk about this. You want so, and how it influenced part of the concept behind Under Fortunate Stars, possibly part of your book too, if you want to talk about that.
Sure.
Yeah, later. So we're talking about the scene in First Contact, which is the Next Generation film, and some of the crew end up going back in time to Earth's past, where they encounter some people from their history. Including Zephram Cochrane, who was the sort of inventor of the warp drive. And there's this scene, which in the whole context of the movie is very short, like it's just a little moment, but it's where some of the Next Generation crew come up to him and they're telling him like, oh, I went to the high school that was named after you, and I've seen a statue of you. And his reaction to that is just something between shock and extreme discomfort. And in fact, right after that, he decides to run away because he's so overwhelmed with this idea of being confronted with the future that they know, the accomplishment that they know him for. At the time when they meet him, like his prototype had been damaged. He's really at a low point. He does not see a way forward. He's really in a place of despair. And in a way, like hearing that there is this future, or at least a possible future, where he was recognized and known as this heroic, incredible figure that people are excited to meet, he just does not know how to deal with that at all. He freaks out, which I think is reasonable. All of us have had a moment where we've wondered what our future holds, or wanted to know what's going to happen. And, you can worry like maybe things won't turn out the way you planned, or it won't work out. Something that you thought you were going to do, you won't accomplish. But how do you deal with being told that you're expected to do something so critically important to humankind?
One of the
and
things
now you got to do it. You haven't done it yet.
Oh yeah. Well, one of the things I loved about your book is that you get to take that moment and apply it to a whole bunch of different people with different views and different places in their life. I mean the two main characters, League and Kevin, and how they've grown. And I do see some a bit of Zephram Cochrane in one of them.
Yeah, I think I basically took that moment and turned it into an entire story. Because we don't really, in the film, it's a small moment, and very soon after that, things get back on track, things move on. There's other plot points happening. But I thought, that is an entire character arc. What went through his head between being told this thing and accepting the possibility that he could do the thing, and then actually attempting to do the thing. And what if you had his point of view through that? And what if you, what are the different ways that a character could respond to that? Because I think every person would react to that in different ways, depending where, like you said, where they were in their lives, what they had already done, what they thought was possible. But how do you deal with that pressure? And I think that's what some of the characters from the past timeline have to deal with when they find out that, these people that they've encountered who claim to be from the future also believe that they are these historical heroes who, according to their history, had fairly different lives to the course that they think that they're currently on.
So another thing that we as Star Trek fans and authors have in common is that we kind of took a look at the bridges on the nose, and the pointy things on the forehead, and said no more. So tell me a little bit about how you got to the felon, and how, because I loved hearing about this, because it's a lot like the Vi in my book.
Yeah, I think, well, at least classic Star Trek was slightly limited by the special effects budget. So a lot of the aliens are basically a humanoid with some very slight, modification just to show you that this is an alien. But I think that in a book where you don't actually have to show it, you also can go a little bit further with how alien you can make them, and how different they can really be when it's not like a human actor needing to play an alien in a costume. But I also didn't want to go too far to the very, very alien end of things, because at the end of the day, these two species need to communicate, and they need to find some common ground, and they need to be able to do that like within the time frame of the book. And I think that in order to write any kind of first context story that we could realistically do, you kind of need to be at that place where you could find some common ground. Because if you're dealing with like an entity that doesn't have corporeal form, or something that is like sentient rocks, the idea of communication just becomes so much more complex, and it's also like a little bit more difficult to tell a story around that, where you need them to come to an understanding in the end. At least if you want them to be characters that have dialogue and talk.
How much of a spoiler is getting into how you solve that problem? Probably
not really. No, I mean, like the fact that they're telepathic.
I love how you did it, because in a way I was really impressed, because the humans had to go further into a very uncomfortable space in order to fix it. They had to go out and modify themselves and modify and yeah. So the aliens are telepathic. They speak entirely to each other, telepathically. And part of the communication barrier is that they did not understand the human attempts to communicate. They did not understand that, that humans were fully sentient, because they didn't have any real way of meeting in the middle, particularly from a point where they're in conflict. And they're in conflict because of this misunderstanding, but because they're in this generations long conflict, and there just really isn't, there hasn't really been any clear path forward to mediate when you can't communicate. And so what ended up happening is that a genetically modified human acquired telepathic speech. This was done through years and years of research, and now in the present timeline, where you have more open communication between the species, there are human interpreters who are modified. They're called the voiced, and they are trained in telepathic communication. So they interpret, and they kind of provide that bridge between the villain and the humans. And it's dangerous.
It can be.
And I love that.
Yes.
I love, I'm not sure Sean loves that, but that's something we'll get to later. Because I always thought about when I was creating my aliens, I did very much the same thing. I was like, well, how far far can I push this? How far can we go and make them as alien as possible without making them completely, because I mean, to a point, we're all, we live in our brains, we see things a certain way. I mean, the world that's out there is not the world that we see in our brains, because our whole system is consistently translating what's out there for us.
Exactly.
Like we can't see infrared. If you ever like think about like what's out there that we can't see or smell or hear, it's just kind of
it's a lot of things. I think that your aliens are probably like slightly more on the alien side of things, but emotionally, right? The fact that they're, if they have an ability to communicate, and they have some emotional resonance with things that we recognize, I think that that's a place where you can meet in the middle, regardless of what communication barriers you have. If you have an emotional understanding, that can be a first step.
Oh yeah, and it's such an important story to tell, right now. Like, I mean, the stories that, and I think it keeps on coming up. It's not only your book, it's not only my book. It's a whole bunch of books where we're trying to really understand like other human beings and understand other cultures, and it's crucial currently that, you know, that we do so. I just really loved the voiced. I loved I'm sorry, the one character. It's so hard. I want to tell everybody all about this wonderful book. I'm just like,
you're just like spoiler bars flashing on the screen at all
bars.
times.
So I'm just gonna go, it's harder than you think it is. I said it would be easy. It is not. It is hard. It is very hard. Yeah, so but it's how we, you know, it's how we deal with things that are unfamiliar to us and things. And that's something I think that's really awesome. You know, a real good place to set things, because we're not only just talking about aliens, we're talking about ourselves.
Of course. Yeah, always.
Yeah, and we do that with the cruise too, right?
Your first contact story made me cry. Like I cried. The spoiler, that moment, I was like, yeah, oh my God.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Not the moment right on the cover.
Oh, no, not that.
Yeah, there's a spoiler right in the cover of my book. So just go right past it. Just you know. I think, you know, and it's really, really cool because on the page we can do that, right? We can go and we can push things to places that you can't get to on the screen, even today.
Yeah.
What about,
especially with going into characters' heads, because when you have a POV, I think that there's certain things, especially when you have a character that has a lot of internal monologue, or like where what they're saying isn't what they're thinking, like that's a bit quite difficult to get across on screen. It can be done, but I think in a book you can just get so much deeper into that, because you can spend half a page on what would happen in 1 second.
Especially with I mean, I'm thinking about Uma, the engineer, who is meeting her her you know, she's a bit of a historian, right?
Yeah, and she's a history nerd.
Yeah. And she's meeting the people that she's read about all this time.
Yeah.
And just being there is amazing. One of the very first times we meet Uma, and this is this made me laugh like out loud, because it's I mean, I also wrote a corporation book, right? It's if Elon Musk actually went to Mars and brought all the corporations with it. I mean, I'm fascinated by what would happen if you went out into space and you had a problem and there was no Earth behind it. And I think one of the reasons, I was just so intensely in love with your book is that you got to play with that a little bit with Z-Corp and some of the other things. Like, for example, I mean, this happens within the first 20 pages, so I'm not going to call it a spoiler. The first time we meet Uma, she's trying to save the day, right? She's in there trying to save the day, and her boss is like, nope, sorry, got to take a break. Corporate rules. And I just laughed because it was so real. It was just so real.
I think well, I think Z-Corp is a little bit less evil than the corporation in your book, which is like
yeah, I would
purely
say so.
Sinister. Z-Corp is more on the annoying side, less on the sinister scale. But
I actually believe that like Z-Corp wasn't always out just to make money. Like they were in it. They're in it for the science sometimes,
and certain people more than others, right? You have like different layers of administration. And I think that was really fun to play with. And I think anyone that's ever worked in like a large office setting or anywhere where there's a corporate structure on top of what you do, so you have kind of your team and your work, but there's something above it that you still have to follow, is going to recognize something in this book. I think a lot of people found that pretty funny. And yeah, I think that a lot of it is about how Many of these crew members are very, very competent and very, very prepared to do administration on a science ship, but they are not Starfleet officers, right? They are not trained in interstellar diplomacy. They are not really trained in managing like a temporal crisis. They don't really have any tools for this. And so at the beginning, you kind of see some of the characters who are more cautious falling back to like looking at the corporate regulations and like, can we find anything, like any precedent for this? But when you can't, it kind of forces even those characters that have worked so well within that structure to move outside of it and use those skills that they have in new ways and just come up with something outside of what they've been trained for.
And it's a real thrill to see them do that. It's a real thrill to write it when your characters are limited by I mean, and there is a limitation in corporate thinking. There's a limitation in what you can do, what your boss asks you to do,
Mm-hmm.
What even if you think if you're a middle manager, who does this, who is I'm thinking of my friend in procurement. Like I had to have him sit down and tell me what that even was, procurement. And so you have, all of these people, and all of a sudden, it's so fun to write characters blossoming out of their little corporate shells.
I think it's my favorite kind of heroes are the completely unprepared. Like I love a good competent hero and a badass, but sometimes people are called to be competent or called to become badasses who never thought that they could, and that's one of my favorite kinds of stories to tell, and quite a few characters go through a version of that journey here.
One of my characters, the first book is about one set of characters, and the second book, I was thinking about what it was going to be, and then it got completely sidetracked by a third character in my book, Natalie, and she was in that whole space where you have to choose one thing. You have to choose to follow one way or to learn new skills and to question the narrative, right? So how do you write someone questioning the narrative? Because I know it's is that easy? Is it because sometimes when I was writing Natalie, like I had to keep on questioning it, because I kind of sat there going like, wow, I'm not going far enough. Like it actually started getting me questioning a lot of the narratives in my life whenever I was like, well, I'm not going far enough. And then I started going, what's true? Oh my God, what is true about like all of the things that I've thought about all my life? And it was fun. How about you?
Yeah, I think, that is a very good like starting point for building a character. One of the questions that you usually come back to is what lie do they believe? What lie do they tell to themselves, and what lie do they tell to other people, and how do they reconcile that when it's challenged in a way that can't be ignored? How do characters deal with something from their past coming back that they did not want to deal with? That happens to several characters. So challenging the narrative, some of the characters are already challenging it right from the beginning. I think Uma, being the history nerd that she is, she knows tons and tons and tons about the historical lives of these figures that she's been interested in, but she also collects unauthorized biographies and a lot of kind of apocryphal data. And so she knows a lot of other things that maybe aren't like found in the typical history text. And through all of that, she's built up a picture that's maybe like a little bit more approaching the truth, but there's still things that happen that challenge beliefs that she has about that. And I think that absolutely would happen no matter where you went to. If you were an expert on a time period and you time traveled back to that time period, I guarantee you will find some things that were completely not how you expected them, that weren't how you interpreted them, or that you just did not know at all, because history doesn't preserve everything.
No, and would we want it to? Like, would we want to know the truth about,
Well,
about everything? I mean, I would, but I don't know if we would survive it.
how would you know if you knew it though? That's the thing. Like, even when you're like, okay, now such and such thing has been found out, but then has it? Right.
Well,
And especially when you start dealing with time travel, that's a whole nother.
Yeah. And human memory, like
mm.
how do you know what you know? Is what you know true? And do you remember it? Like, there was a story I told where my mom and I both tried to throw a shoe at a tarantula.
Oh yeah.
And she says that I threw it, and I say that she threw it, and both of us remember it in a completely different way.
And that's a story that happened to you.
Yeah.
That's something that happened to you in your lifetime. Both of the people were there. Now take that and multiply it by 2-3 generations of retelling. And then 2 people heard the story from one of the people, 2 people heard it from another person, and they remember it different ways. And then that gets passed on.
And of course, those poor people who show up and are told, you're actually very important. That's psychologically wild. That is psychologically wild. One of the things that is psychologically wild is writing a time travel story. There are many, many reasons why I have not yet attempted to write a time travel story, but you have, and you nailed it.
Oh, thank you.
One of the things that I love about the story is that it is, it's kind of like a puzzle box. You were telling me some of your, it's a little bit like a puzzle box. I know that that word has been used a number of times to describe the book, and I love it because I went back through it. Preparing for this talk, and I started seeing, okay, there's that piece and that piece, and it was just a really good read on the second time around too. How do you keep it all? How do you keep it all going? How do you keep it all in line?
I don't draft in order, so it starts chaotically and it slowly slots into place. I think that the process of writing it is very much like the experience of reading it, although it's like seeing where everything fits and finding those pieces as you go and figuring out the order to give that information to the reader, not just to give them the facts, but also to make sure that things emotionally resonate between the different timelines. I think the show Lost, if you've ever seen the show Lost, was a huge inspiration for me as a fiction writer. As soon as I saw that show, like when it aired, I was like, one day I want to write a book that feels like this show structurally, where you have a story that's kind of taking place in the present day, and there's a separate story taking place in flashbacks, and they are in conversation with each other. And so the flashback will give you some information that recontextualizes something that you got in the present. You find out how characters are connected in the past, and even in ways that the characters didn't know that they were connected, right? Because you see how, in their past, they've come across each other, they've influenced each other's lives without necessarily even being aware of it. But as the reader, you see it. And I think that just going back, rewatching that show, especially like crucial seasons where they did that and like kind of figuring out what made that work.
Time travel, like what is your favorite thing about writing a time travel story? Because it just drives me bonkers.
I think the possibilities, because there's a lot of different ways to write time travel. If you were to
are you a rules person or because I always get hung up on the rules, right? Like the paradoxes. I prefer more of a time is fungible, anything can happen type of thing.
I am fine with just about any rule set as long as it's consistent internally. You need to know how it works, like even if your characters didn't necessarily know all along. And I think that that's one of the things where if you don't know like what, which model of time travel it's going to be, that can also be interesting to go into a story and figure that out, or to have that question unfold in the process of either writing or reading.
Yeah, I kind of got the impression reading this that you were kind of a history nerd.
Maybe
bit.
just a little bit.
like
I did study history at university.
Oh, you did? That's
did.
great.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, because I felt like I felt like you did. Like Uma really struck me as someone who had a real respect for the process of working through historical questions, and figuring out like what really happened.
Yeah, I think also the if you work with primary sources at all, like how important it is to think about their context. Who wrote this and why? What was the purpose of this? And what agenda did that person have? Like if it's like, somebody writing a history from the point of view of they're writing it for a king who wanted it written a certain way. Like it's the context. What was the purpose of the document, not just the fact that it existed, but I think that you can find layers of truth in things if you understand also why, like what was the function of the document or the source or the whatever it is that you're looking at. And I think that that's something that as a historian you become, especially if you go further and you're an academic that's studying things, you start to find how many gaps there really are. It's almost like the more that you know, the more you see how much empty space there is, where there's still questions and where there's gaps in what's known and where, what might evolve. But there also is a limit to what, there's things that are lost forever. They're gone. You can't, unless you go back in time, ever really fill those gaps in with anything material.
Gosh,
you only have you only have your interpretation. But I think as a writer of fiction or as a writer of time travel, those gaps can be the beautiful spaces where the magic happens, because no one knows what the story is. So there's some space to tell a story there. I think the people that write, alternate history fantasies or time travel stories where someone goes back, like those gaps are where you can play with ideas and, or look at the what ifs, like what if this had happened instead of that? In a way that's in conversation with the truth as we know it and the possible truth that could be there.
Ooh, what is truth? We're gonna get that.
There is. I don't think this is not a spoiler. I'm just gonna go and say it because it's in one of my favorite scenes in the book. It is a conversation between Uma and one of her historical heroes, and she's asking him about a specific event in his life and saying, I've always wondered, what is the truth about this? What really happened? And he says, I was there and I'm not entirely sure. And this goes back to what you were saying about memory, right? Like you experience something, and if you're talking about something like a relationship or a time in your life and time has passed, do you really still remember that as it really was?
Exactly.
Or do you remember the emotions that you still have left about it? Or even if you have a journal that you wrote during that time, like there's your primary source. When you go back and read that, you're not really getting the full picture of everything because you didn't write down every single thing.
Oh no.
So there's even from your own life, you have these kind of gaps.
Oh, yes. And especially if you have I've been doing a lot of reading lately on this. Like I did a lot of reading to write Architects of Memory. But you have that your level of trauma that you were going under, your level of stress, your level of just existing in a human being, in a human suit at that time also affects just how much you remember. Like, I mean, for example, right now, how many of us are having trouble with, what did I eat for lunch today?
Yeah. Did this happen on Tuesday last week, or that was 3 weeks ago? I think the time has become very squishy. Like I'm like, oh yeah, the other day something happened, and then I look and it was like April 2nd, like something like that was not the other day. That was quite some time ago.
But thanks to you, we don't have to worry about that for Under Fortunate Stars. No, because well, I mean, yeah, but one of the things I do like is that there are still a couple questions at the end. You don't get to find out everything.
There is a few little questions that are there because there have to be. I think there's also a little bit of room for you to tell your own story in there if there's something, spoiler bars, but there is some space for interpretation on a couple of little things.
That's always good. That's always good. I know I loved, I mean, and I know I keep on going back to, I love this, but I really did. I know you had tons of really, really fun action scenes in this, where there where people are really trying to science it up. And you do get that Star Trek feeling of, okay, everybody, try to figure out what this thing is. Let's try to fix the engine. And so how, like, one of my huge things for Architects of Memory and Engines of Oblivion was how to make technobabble interesting.
Okay.
So how do you take a sort of a more technical thing, because there are lots of action technical scenes in your book and they're all fantastic. How do you do that? Because I know my answer, but I want to hear yours.
I think that, well, my science fiction is not hard sci-fi. So there is some science and some things that are technically possible, but it's more about what the story needs than about explaining the science of time travel, because we don't really know that. That's not something that we know. So a lot of the stuff is completely invented. However, I think that a really neat trick is to have characters explaining things to people who are not technical. So they'll be like, okay, I'm just going to explain this in a way you'll understand. And then they can use metaphors or sort of, drawn out examples of something to convey what's really a pretty complicated concept in a very quick way, so that it doesn't bog down the scene with a lot of technological explanations.
And then the reader's like, oh yeah,
the reader's like, oh yeah, okay, that's cool. But it's not implied that they're explaining it in full. They're just giving you the feel of it. And I think that's something that Star Trek does really well too. Like there's scenes where they just go or something, but the way that it's told, you get the vibe of what's happening, even if you don't really know, the meaning of every word that they said. The way that things are presented is dynamic and interesting and sounds cool. So
what's the most fun thing about writing an action scene? Because to me it's writing it and then taking out any possible thing that could slow it down. I find that fun. What about you?
So I don't think I'm particularly good at writing them in the sense that they don't just like pour out. I really need to come back to action scenes a lot and like look at the blocking and what's going on. But I think that something that I have learned from one of my critique partners, Claire Wynn, who writes incredible action scenes, is to make sure that you're coming back to the character. What does this mean to them? Like, it's not just that they're doing something or whether they're kicking ass or they're solving a problem, but you have to keep coming back to why do I care, and going back to the emotional story that's being told in parallel. And I think that helps it feel like you're really in there with the character. It's not just this top-down view of like people having a fist fight, but you're really in there with either a spectator or one of the participants. How do they feel seeing this, and what's going on? Like, what sensations do they have, and why does this matter? Because an action scene that doesn't matter is just like filler.
And that's what I love about writing like the soft science fiction, the kind of things that we write, because we get to come back to the characters and we get to spend so much time with them, having their relationships and their world affecting them, and they're affecting the world. So many times I feel like science fiction is expected to be like, well, you must keep to this, you must cleave to the science, and everything else is there. But being able to have really fun characters and get in their heads and have them play off one another, like especially in the POV and the POVs that you chose to write in. Sometimes you get to see one character dealing with the situation, and then you see the other character and it's completely different. And I'm really
happy that the action scenes are working, because that's something that I have to work hard on, because it's not something that comes naturally to me. I'm much more like a dialogue and emotions person, and writing action scenes is definitely something that I learned probably mostly for this book. I don't know that I had written anything that had quite that many scenes that required complicated blocking and saying what people were doing when, and also coming back to, like I said, that emotional core at the same time. So thank you.
Well, I cannot believe I'm saying this, but can you believe it's already time to bring Alex back?
Ooh, it is. Alex.
I can't believe it. It's already
that was crazy. You guys,
that's what I said. It's gonna be so fast because when we chatted before this, when we were just like, let's do a quick catch up and talk about what we might talk about, and we talked for 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours.
Like, we're not gonna have any trouble filling 40 minutes.
You're just so much fun to talk to.
Yeah, well, I had a wonderful time listening to everything so far, and I think we have at least a couple questions. But everybody should dump every question that you have that isn't a spoiler into the Q&A box right now so that I can read them, because I can't pull them from your mind and guess what they are. But while you were thinking up your wonderful questions, it is time to pull the winner for the copy of Karen's book, Architects of Memory. Who is going to get it? You can imagine me doing something physical here, even though it's completely technological. All right, our winner is Lula. Lula, are you here? Yes, Lula is here. All right, congratulations. You win a copy of Architects of Memory, and it looks like, yeah, you bought a book, so it will be with your other book when that gets sent out. So congratulations. And
Lula, if you can somehow get if the address can somehow get to me, I can send a book plate for that too.
Yeah, of course, we can make that happen. All right. Wait.
Oh, did you want to say the thing that we were going to say? What was the thing? You said there was something we're saving a secret for later. Is it about the song?
Right.
Was it about the song?
Yeah, it's about the song. So another thing that Ren and I both did was that we had we went really awesomely overboard with our launches. Like, Ren wrote a song and it's so good.
Yeah, so I co-wrote the lyrics with my friend Matthias of the band The Burning Hell, and he wrote the music and arranged and produced the song, and we released it as a single, which you can find on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Music and probably a couple of other streaming places. It is called The Flight of the Jonah. It tells the sort of legendary version of the history of the Fortunate Five, who were those humans who ended the interstellar war. You can listen to it. It is spoiler free because it tells you the mythological, over the top, very exciting, legendary version of events. And it's a folk song that actually you see a little bit of it on the page in the book, and we wrote it for real. So it is very cool. Please do check it out. If somebody could put a link in the chat,
I love it.
Or you can search on any of your favorite music streaming platforms or find it on my website.
I mean, why write if you can't like make videos and write songs about it and just really get into the happy.
It was such a fun project. It was such a fun project. We're going to do a little bit of behind the scenes about it probably later this summer. So we'll do a couple more blogs and some how it came to be. But you can listen to it right now. Just very fun.
Keep an eye out for that. That sounds amazing.
All right. I'm linking to it on Spotify right now. There. Yay. And the words win or when, because I was typing a comment and forgot to delete that part. Win or when, win or always. But that's the link to the song if you use Spotify. And everybody listen to me, especially Erin, and put all of the questions in their heads into the Q&A. So let's answer some of them, starting with Bethany. Ren, do you conceive of the time travel in the book as time loop or alternate history?
Alternate history or time loop? Okay. That depends on whether you consider the history as recorded to be the truth, which is actually one of the questions that the characters in the book go through. So when they meet up in the time anomaly, one of the first things that they realize very quickly is that some of the events of the lives of the Fortunate Five are not correct as they know them. They seem to have lived very different lives. And unraveling why that is and whether it can be patched up to still be the same is part of what Uma sets out to do. So I think it really depends on whether you conceive of alternate history as changing something or as finding out how things were, and finding out which one of those it is a core part of the story.
All right. Erin, question number 1 asks, did you dye your hair to match the cover?
I did.
The swoop and everything. That's very good.
I do that too. It's amazing.
All right. Sorry, cats keep coming in and going out.
I love seeing cats. All the cats.
There are so many of them, and they do not know what they want to do.
Seeing pets on Zoom is just always a joy.
Really adds texture to the otherwise, sometimes mundane experience. Although this hasn't been a mundane experience because this has been a really delightful conversation.
The cats are an added bonus.
We love cats.
So Allison is asking about the song, and if there's anything else you want to add to that, the process of commissioning.
The process of working on the song. Well, I think we went through quite a few iterations. We wrote the lyrics together. Matthias read the book. He's also a huge Star Trek fan, which I didn't know until after he read the book, which as you find out. I think what we talked about a lot was looking at folk songs and how they work. First of all, they're usually quite catchy and like have a chorus that's easy to remember. And they also tell a story. So you may remember like a year or two ago when the Wellerman became like a big thing. And everybody knew this song. And if you listen to that song, so there's like the chorus, which is the part that's really catchy, but there's tons of verses, and there's even multiple versions of verses that if you look up different versions of the song, there's more of them. And so that's kind of how we built this song. We looked at the main, the big 5, the Fortunate 5. What did they all do for the piece? What was interesting about them? How were they conceived of heroically? So they all have a nickname that history knows them by, and the song goes through all of them and says their nickname and what they did for the piece. And there's a scene in the book where one character is like, oh, I think I can remember all of them, but I have to sing that song to myself to like remember who they were and what they all did. And I think just building that in and seeing how the song could fit with the events in the book and how it's mentioned a couple of times in the story. So what would that song really be like? So it was a super fun project to work on.
All right. Erin and Claire both ask a question that seems to be a trap. How did you come up with the name for the Jonah?
Oh my, this is a meme at this point. Okay. I was just like, is somebody going to say this? Okay. So a lot of people ask, is the Jonah a reference to Jonah in the Whale, which is like that story about getting like swallowed by the whale, where the whale is the void? And then one of my beta readers found a historical document that talked about maritime slang and saying like Jonah is a slang term for a bad luck passenger on a ship. Is this why you named the ship the Jonah? I think I know, like it's this whole deep reason. It is because when I was naming the ship and putting a placeholder name in, I looked at a picture of Jonah Hill that was randomly on my desk, and the name never left. That's it. There's no other reason. And people find this so funny. I think I'll be telling this every time we talk about this book forever. It is in a Q&A on my website now. It was a picture of Jonah Hill like walking in town, like a paparazzi shot that was randomly up on my screen, like on TMZ or something at the time when I was putting a placeholder name in the book. And that is the true story of why the ship is called the Jonah. We never changed it. It is still there.
It works though, so it's okay, you know?
You can imagine it's one of those other reasons, but that is not true.
Allison in the chat says noted space enthusiast Jonah Hill. So. Let's see. So Michael says, Ren, which of your POV characters was the most fun to write?
Oh, the most fun to write has got to be Jareth. I mean, Jareth writes himself. He's such a funny character. He is a bit of a kind of space rogue archetype. He always has a comeback. He has a quip. He has a humorous answer to everything. He is a smartass, and I think his dialogue is just super, super fun. I think it's also really fun to write those moments when you see beyond that facade of sort of maverick chill that he has and actually go a little bit deeper with him. So in terms of dialogue and just the kind of wild stuff that he does, it definitely Jareth was the most fun to write.
Muting myself, not right. Erin, question number 3, and we do have time for everybody, so don't worry. Would you ever consider writing another book in the universe of Under Fortunate Stars?
Yes, I would consider it. I have a lot of material for this book that did not make it into the final book because the first draft was 200,000 words long. This book is not that long, so there is a lot of material, and also stuff that was never in the draft, like just side stories and little short stories and bits and pieces that I wrote. I think there's probably some kind of bonus scene type things which may show up at some point. If you subscribe to my newsletter, keep an eye out on my blog. That's definitely something that I might do. As far as writing another full novel in this universe, there's definitely space for that because it's a big universe and there's a lot of time to cover. I don't think that I will likely write anything with these same characters because it does give them an ending. So most of the character arcs and the big plot arcs in this book do come to a conclusion. If I did write anything else with these characters, it would probably be more in the past timeline, like maybe a novella or some short stories about, parts of their past that we didn't get to see in flashbacks, but never say never.
You like to hear that. Amelia says, what was the biggest surprise for you in writing this book, either in terms of the plot or just the more general process of writing it?
The fact that I managed to cut it from 200,000 words to like 134,000 words to query it is still something where I'm like, how? It was a long process that involved a lot of cue cards on the floor and crying and cursing and seeming like this is never going to, because it does fit together like a puzzle box, like we've talked about. If you then start to take some pieces out and think, okay, how do you condense that? I'm really proud of how that turned out, but it was a lot of work. And I think it did work out in the end, but there was a point where I was like, I just don't know. This book is long. So I learned a lot.
I'm excited to hear about the cue cards actually, because I think especially in this era where people work primarily digitally, it's always exciting to hear about somebody whose writing process involves physical objects to help you.
Yeah. You want to be able to crumple it up and throw it against the wall. You can do that digitally.
Yes, literally throw it. Like you have
like
just
an actual space this is going out.
Fit together.
Yep.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I work digitally as well. Like I think you can do it in Trello if you ever use Trello, like make little cards that you move around. I did that too, but there's always a point when I'm drafting where I need to just feel it in my hands, whether it's post-it notes or cue cards, and just lay it out and see. Also, it just helps like see how big it is when it can cover like an entire wall or like the whole floor, where on the screen you have a limit to how much you can show and still be able to read it.
It's so great. I'm picturing like the Charlie Day doing
that's yes, that is this.
Let's see. Rita says, it was fascinating learning about your writing process, Ren. Is there a character in your book that you feel particularly drawn to or fond of? I note that those are two totally different things.
That I feel particularly drawn to or fond of. I mean, I love all of them dearly. I've spent many years with these characters at this point. I know a lot more about them that is even in the book. I feel like, I mean, definitely, I have a soft spot for Uma, the history nerd. I think we have some things in common, like being extremely awkward when we meet people that we admire, and just like nerding out about questions that are unanswerable, and just. But I think that Eldrick Gleason Gronsky's journey was definitely my favorite to write, because I think he goes through the most change of perspective from the beginning of the novel to the end. He is the one that has, that Zephyr Cochrane moment where he's told he's supposed to be the captain of the peace mission, and he is definitely not doing anything like that right now, nor does he think that he's capable of doing something like that. And I think that he writing his character and that complicated journey, like how does he get to making that decision whether he is or isn't going to attempt to fulfill this destiny that he's been told about. It was very emotional writing that one. And Sean, of course, I've got to mention her because she's my fourth POV character. I think her journey has a lot of ups and downs. She is someone who has a troubling past, and working through that is a large part of her journey. She's also an observer. She's a little bit of the lower decks character in a way, where you get to see how stuff works when you're not, in charge of things. And giving that perspective, her friends are the people who are the junior engineers and who don't necessarily have as much say, but you also get those beautiful moments where they're complaining about their the company and what they have to do, and like there's some really interesting stuff there too. So I have to say that I love them all for different reasons.
I feel like you wrote science fiction's very first facilities manager.
I think I would actually love doing her job. She hates her job, but someone asked me in a blog interview, like, what job would you want for Zacorp? And I'm like, actually, I think I would like Sean's job. Because like I'm a former producer, and I think I could apply some of the same skills. Like I really love being that kind of connective glue between different departments, getting to talk to everybody, and really just knowing what's going on in all the different corners of the ship. So also I said if any weird time traveling visitors came on board, I would get to show them around. So that's a big bonus.
Kind of in a related question from Amanda, which character do you most relate to?
Do I most relate to? Well, Sean in the job sense, probably, aside from really, really hating it. I think, being called upon to clean up all the stuff at work, and also in some ways she's a sounding board where people from different parts of the ship tell her their problems, and she knows a lot of the gossip about what's going on and stuff. And I think that if you're a person that floats between departments, that is always going to be you. It also just means you kind of get to make friends with people from different parts of the company as well, in a way that you wouldn't if you were very much with your own team all the time. And Uma for the history nerd part. I think Jareth is far too cool for me to relate to him. Like I don't have that many quips, and he's just way too chill. And Eldrick, do I relate to him? I think on an emotional level, I think there's always going to be bits and pieces of your own experiences in anything that you write. But I probably have the least in common with him, but I also feel like I do understand him pretty well, because, there's pieces of other fictional characters and real world things in his story that are very dear to me. So yeah. I don't know if that answered it. I relate to all of them.
Sarah points out that you wrote the quips, so yes.
Okay, but I wrote them like over time. I didn't say them in the moment.
Just like spitting them out.
I just, I'm sure I could think of something half a day later, but.
Amanda has one other question, and that is our second to last question. The big writer's block question. Do you get it? And if so, how did you overcome it?
Did I get writer's block? I've got to points with the story where I was stuck. But like, because I draft out of order, I just tend to jump to another place in the manuscript where I did have more to write about. I would sometimes go back and edit an older scene or just like read other parts of what I'd already written. So I think drafting out of order does avoid some of that stuckness. But always tried and true writer's block relief is to go and read someone else's work, especially if you have critique partners or if you have writing friends, somebody that you're beta reading for, getting out of your world and into someone else's, and also just putting on a sort of different lens where you're, thinking about storytelling and how to explain what works and what doesn't in a story. Sometimes just leaving it alone for a bit is the best thing that you can do. You don't always need to be sitting in a chair typing in order to be writing or creating, because your brain is always percolating. So go and watch a movie or watch a show that really inspired you. Like I said, I would go back and watch certain parts of Lost where I think that they had that kind of resonance really down, and just think about how you can apply those things to your storytelling without focusing overly on a specific problem, but just like letting all that stuff flow in, and all of that is part of the creative process. So
we have one more question. Karen, I'm actually interested to hear how you answer that question, because I think people approach it so differently.
Writer's block. No, it's not different at all. I am a really, really, really big proponent of trunking things. If it's not working, if you're just not there, put it in a drawer and go write fan fiction.
Yeah, that's another thing.
Just write something like the other day. It's
something
fun.
It's
like fix that one episode with Janeway and Paris and the salamanders. Go fix that. Like just have some fun with something that you're gonna have fun with. And come back when you just feel better. Because sometimes it's just like you look at the mess on the floor and you're just like, I don't want to clean that up right now. So don't.
You draft out of order too.
Yeah, right? I do draft out of order.
We've discovered so much. Like, there's really no wonder that we loved each other's books, because we have so many things in common, like from our process to how we think about stories. And
there's this thing really called cool. Like, I don't know if you do this too, but it's like tentpole moments where and also cool bits. This is an internet thing from way back in the day. I don't know when the day was. Like, I want to say 2009. Like, I mean, like before social media. But LiveJournal. Someone posted about cool bits, and I have never forgotten it. It's like, why are you writing anything that's not a cool bit? So if you're having a problem, you got to stop and think about whether you even need that scene that you're writing.
Yeah, speaking on the fanfic thing, though, I think like a piece of advice that I've given before when I'm mentoring is like, say, what fic would someone write about this? And why can you not put some of that in?
Oh, totally.
Like, write the scene as if you're writing a fic, and then see like what elements of that, okay, some of it's going to be over the top and maybe it doesn't fit in with your story, but some elements of that, there's a reason why you feel like someone would be drawn to write about that. Can you put something in there, especially if it's an emotional moment or like a character flashback or whatever it is that's pulling you to that moment, or that you think would pull a reader there? Just give it to them. You can just put it in. So
just write it, just do it. Wonderful.
And if you're bored, your reader might be bored. So just find a way to move around it. And I just love the cool. Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're giving me ideas now. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, we are at 7:07 and we have one question remaining. Rebecca says, do you have a favorite historical conspiracy theory that inspired Uma's?
Do I have a favorite? I mean, I have some favorite historical mysteries that I think are like weird things that I always come back to. One of them is the Voynich manuscript, which is this super weird old text that's like written either in code or in like a language that nobody's ever deciphered. And there's been so many interesting attempts to try to decode it or figure out what it means. Like, you literally don't know. Is this just somebody was messing around, or is it like the only text left of something that was really important? And I think things like that, which truly are just baffling, are such a nice ground to think about writing fiction around, and not necessarily around that thing specifically, but what if something like that? What if this, but in space, is always a good. And then as far as like, I've been asked also like where, if I could travel back and look at something in the past, what would I want to know? And I think some of the things that fascinate me are the things that hover in that zone between legend and fact, and stuff that has been mythologized where you think there might be a little shred of something, like the King Arthur mythos, which there is maybe a shred of something where, you know, there was a king and there was something, maybe there was someone with this name, maybe some of the things, but then pop culture and like retelling and all of these things, like even modern films are still retelling this, thinking about the whole of it and thinking, if you could go back and look at whatever the grain of truth was that inspired this, how far is it from what actually happened? Or is there anything there? I was actually just talking to a friend recently who's writing a historical fantasy, and she mentioned that she had come up with a name for a character, like it was like somebody that was in the Pope's guard, and then she went to a primary source that she hadn't read before, and there was someone mentioned that had a name super similar to what she wrote, and it's like, what, how? That is fascinating. Like, is it that something was up there in something that you read before that just came back, or do you sometimes just hit on the right story by accident? All that stuff is amazing. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question. I may have just gone on a little history nerdy rant there, but
That's what we love.
Yep. Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, everything you have just sits there and percolates. And
it just percolates. You might have read something 10 years ago and it's just up there. And then one day you're just sitting there like, oh, there was that. Like, that feels really deeply familiar somehow. Memory is just so interesting.
Memory and storytelling. Well, that brings us to the end of our time. So I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who is here and to everybody who bought a book. If you would like to get, this is very important, if you would like to get a copy of this book that includes a personalized book plate, and a sticker, and a bookmark, and postcards, is that?
Yeah, this is a postcard.
Yeah.
It's a Sieger City postcard, a couple of stickers, a bookmark, and the book plate, which will be personalized if you would like it to be.
So pretty.
Yeah, so if you would like all those things, which I've seen in person and they're all very lovely, you must go to this link tonight. So if you go tomorrow after about 8 a.m, this will no longer be available. If you go tonight to this page, you'll get all of those things with your book. If you've already ordered one, thank you so much. That is awesome. We appreciate the support. Yeah. And thank you so much to Ren and Karen for having such an engaging, wonderful conversation about what is truly an engaging and wonderful book.
Thank you so much for having us. And please check out Karen's book also, Architects of Memory, if you love first contact stories, and characters who have to go up against evil corporations, which is like a favorite sci-fi theme of mine. Please do check it out, and it's awesome.
And pre-order Ren's book tonight so you get the swag.
Yep, go and get the swag. Tomorrow at 8:01, I'm going to be signing them, so you gotta do it before 8 a.m. tomorrow.
Well, good night, everybody. Thank you.